So the Dalek Invasion of Earth is the second Dalek serial, with the evil creatures making their big return nearly a year after their introduction. This also means that this is the first return of an enemy within Doctor Who history, and brings the threat to Earth. The Daleks' popularity saved the show from cancellation, with a battle on their home planet, and now they've returned to invade Earth and face humanity. But can Terry Nation's second attempt fix the weakness of his previous serial? At one episode less, the problematic pacing in the last stretch of the Daleks should be gone. And now he's writing for a much more refined Doctor, and a quartet who are in a very different place to where they were back in the first Dalek serial. So let's see if the Dalek Invasion of Earth is an improvement or a mess, or an improvement with a messy ending. Now, not talking about the opening shot of a serial would be a crime, as we see a man wearing ragged clothes and a strange metal helmet, walking down into the Thames and drowning himself. Behind him as he steps down is a sign which reads, "It is forbidden to dump bodies into the river." And for openings to a serial, this is a dark hook. Up to this point, all serials have begun with the quartet either in the TARDIS or just leaving the TARDIS after arriving. But in this we are seeing the world just before their arrival, seeing events which they won't get to see. Without the comfort of the quartet to experience and explain these things, the atmosphere is tense and terrifying, this being reinforced by the environment suggesting this is Earth, potentially bringing the threat right to the viewer's door. And on broadcast this tension would have been higher as the episode's title is World's End, and makes no reference to the Daleks, leaving the viewers in suspense and left to wonder what's happening with no possible answers. The TARDIS then lands and our quartet find themselves in the strange environment. The Doctor is certain it's Earth, but they notice it's quiet, with Ian having his theory.
Pretty deserted. Probably Sunday.
This situation is interrupted by Susan injuring herself and the bridge above them collapsing, cutting them off from the TARDIS. And the following conversation helps to elevate the creepiness of the quietness, as unlike with previous serials, Ian is the one who emphasises the need to clear the rubble and make the TARDIS accessible in case of danger, rather than the Doctor, who tended to be the one who was more concerned when separated from the TARDIS. It's a good little switch up which helps show Ian's more cautious attitude from their adventures. This is where the quartet split up due to Susan's injured ankle, with Barbara remaining with her while the Doctor and Ian go to find some people or tools. And this leads into one of the most iconic lines of the serial.
What you need is a jolly good smack bottom.
With the quartet split up, the story splits into two, with the Doctor and Ian being faced with objects which create mysteries, while Susan and Barbara meet people which leads to some answers. Either way, they're all being faced with different mysteries, with the main one being who or what caused the destruction on Earth. But we do learn that Susan eats.
And what do you do?
I eat.
I know this is not at all relevant, but I just wanted to mention it, as it's a great line and does show off a more rebellious side to Susan, which hasn't really been shown off before. This is where we meet the Resistance group, with the notable members being Tyler, David, Dorman and Jenny, each of which I will talk about more in detail later when they become more relevant to the plot as separate characters rather than a group. The Doctor and Ian return to the TARDIS to find the others gone, but encounter Robo-Men, the brainwashed servants of the invaders, who trap them. The Doctor suggests escaping into the Thames, but a Dalek blocks their potential escape in one of the most iconic scenes, cliffhangers, in all of Doctor Who. Now, I've been talking about the plot as if I don't know who the villains of this serial are, but I think that's a more interesting way to discuss it, as that is how it would be viewed on broadcast. As I mentioned earlier, the episode 1 title makes no reference to the Daleks, so the average viewer wouldn't have known about their return, making this cliffhanger incredibly impactful for long-time fans, alongside new ones who are unfamiliar with these metallic foes. And while this isn't relevant, this is definitely a weakness of the overall serial title and box art, which shows the Daleks as it lowers the tension for a new viewer, if they go in knowing who the villain of this week is. This cliffhanger is still incredibly iconic, but it can never have the same impact to a new viewer, as it's highly unlikely they won't know that it's the Daleks behind all of this. So back to the serial. This is the Daleks' big return, and this shot is an amazing reveal. In one scene, it reveals the enemy, demonstrates they now have the ability to move on surfaces other than metal, and shows an ability to traverse environments which a human wouldn't be able to. Without the Dalek doing anything, the threat has been emphasised just by its arrival in the story, and the mystery of who is behind the destruction of Earth now has an answer. Although no proper explanation is given as to how the Daleks now draw their power without metal surfaces, it's to do with the massive satellite dishes on their backs, and also they have new raised bumpers for traversal. Before moving on from this scene, I do want to note that it was written by the script editor, David Whittaker, and not Terry Nation, with the original draft featuring the Daleks being revealed with the landing of their saucer. This isn't the last time we'll see Whittaker doing notable rewrites to the script, and so I'll discuss them when they come up. With the Daleks introduced, the story goes from building a creepy atmosphere to more action. This change really coming up when the Resistance group raid the Dalek saucer at the end of episode 2. This assault fails and divides the group up again, with the Doctor being reunited with Susan alongside David and later Tyler, while Ian hides in the saucer with new character Larry, and Barbara returns to the Resistance headquarters with Jenny, where Dorman is awaiting news of the attack. Ultimately, all three groups make their way to the Dalek mine in Bedfordshire, with Ian going directly in the saucer, the Doctor and Susan hiding out in the sewers before walking, and Barbara stealing a truck. The Doctor and Susan's journey is the least interesting, so I'll discuss it first. First of all, I note that Hartnell doesn't appear in episode 4, not due to a holiday this time, but instead due to a back injury which occurred during either rehearsals or recording of episode 3, which is why he spends a lot of episode 3 sitting down. This means that for the plotline, episode 4 focuses on Susan and David as they meet up with Tyler in the sewers. This does sadly mean that it slows the plot down a bit for them, as they can't begin making their way to Bedfordshire until episode 5, although when the Doctor does make his return, he quickly gets back to action. And we get the first mention of the Doctor's view on guns.
No, Tyler, no, I never take life. Only when my own is immediately threatened.
So he makes his return in style at least. We do get a lot of scenes between Susan and David, building their relationship, notably a scene of David touching Susan with a fish, which leads to them wrestling before doing a kiss. Beyond that, there isn't too much to this plotline until they arrive at the mine. I'll get back to them later. Barbara, on the other hand, perhaps has the most interesting and memorable of the three plotlines. Alongside Jenny and Dorman, the trio run across the empty streets of London in some beautiful location filming. While not the first for the show, it's certainly the first extensive shoot. This is where we get the iconic shots of the Daleks roaming the streets and having casual conversations. Plus the strange music used and lack of actual sound is just so different to the rest of the serial. These scenes really stick out and are so memorable despite not a single line being spoken by anyone. This leads to them staying at a transport museum where they plan to steal a truck in order to escape from London and get to Bedfordshire. And this is where Dorman's story reaches its conclusion. Now Dorman was the designer of the bombs used in the attack on the saucer, which failed, and so he has redesigned the bombs and is certain that they will be able to destroy the Daleks this time. And so he decides to use the bombs himself against a small squad of Daleks which are nearby. And this is a very heroic sacrifice. Dorman rolls up in his wheelchair, throws his walking sticks away and stands up from his chair, throwing his bombs at the Daleks as they exterminate him. It's his heroic last stand. He knows he's going to die here, but he wants to go out on his own terms while trying to destroy these Daleks. And the sad thing is, his attempt was in vain. The bomb is completely ineffective against the Daleks, but he leaves the plans for the bombs behind, which will be crucial to Barbara later. After a near miss with a Dalek,
Who are you? Stop. Cultural.
Barbara and Jenny escape in the truck, with Barbara gaining another kill to her name by ramming into a Dalek. They escape from London, with their road journey reaching its end when they reach a cottage where two women live. These two women repair the clothes of the slaves in the mines in exchange for food from the Daleks, although it's only a small amount. They allow Barbara and Jenny to stay the night. This is a part of a trap so they can turn them in order to get more food. Now while we get the views in the form of the resistance group and the mine workers as to how the Dalek invasion has affected people, these two women are the most interesting viewing to that effect. While they only appear in 2 short scenes, they are well defined as desperate people. They are in constant fear of the Daleks and are only surviving by being useful to them. Despite living in a house outside of the mines, they are just as much slaves as the miners. So when the opportunity to get more food very literally walks into their hut, they obviously turn on their fellow humans for their own interest, and you can't blame them. Their performances really show their desperation. The older woman is cunning while the younger is more openly scared. You can see how they came to this decision and they don't regret it. Not because they're bad people, but because they want to survive. The opening shot shows it all as we see they're cold and worn down, wearing rags, and as soon as they hear a sound, they get ready to defend themselves. And once they're alone after the Dalek captures Barbara and Jenny, the young woman's joy as she shows off the food and even eats the sugar with her fingers really shows their desperation. Now we know absolutely nothing about these two, but given their age gap it could be a mother and daughter, or even if it's not, the way they interact does show that the younger one does see the older one as a motherly figure. I think best emphasised in the final shot and the earlier shot, when the younger one returns and rushes to the older one for comfort. Although I do find the bit when the younger lady is sent off to tell the Daleks is directed a bit sillily, as it feels like it's happening a bit fast, plus Barbara and Jenny are like a metre away. Finally we have Ian, who arrives at the mine far sooner than the rest of the quartet, arriving later the same day he left London, while the others don't arrive until the following day or at least many hours later. Because of this, Ian gets a lot more time to interact with the mine workers. Upon arrival, Ian and his companion Larry meet a miner named Wells, who saves them from a Robo-Man and sets up a meeting with a black marketeer named Ashton. Ashton only appears briefly, but he's very well written. Unlike the two women, he is someone who is thriving in the current times, using his skill to sneak into the mines to trade food and other items for jewellery and other items. He is definitely a greedy character who has only profited from the Dalek invasion, and so his end at the hands of the Sliver feels very deserved. And for a character who uses his wits to survive in the world and profit, it's fitting that instead of the Daleks or even the miners setting a trap for him, he just gets unlucky. And since it's introduced at this point in the serial, I'll talk about the Sliver. So the Sliver is essentially the Skyro equivalent of a guard dog, being described as a pet of a black Dalek, who they also call the commandant of the camp. It roams the mine area at night, hunting for food. Now this creature is unlike anything we've seen in the show before, and unlike the Magnodon we saw in the Daleks. It's an organic life form, and the show's first true monster being neither humanoid nor robotic. Now, beyond having the unique ability to change its appearance between the recap and the new footage of episode 5, the Sliver doesn't do a lot within the story. The Sliver is another aspect of the serial which changed slightly from script to screen, as Nation originally intended to have multiple of the creatures, or at least the suggestion of multiple, but this was changed for one during the script editing process. Although due to a recording break it jumps between locations, as it's seen killing Ashton while at the same time being ready to attack Ian and Larry at the edge of the abyss, meaning that there is the suggestion that there are at least 2 Slivers. So Ian and Larry escape into a mining bucket, which has magically appeared, and when the Sliver attempts to follow, Ian hits it with a rock until it plummets into the abyss. And that's it for the Sliver. Now I really like the idea of the Sliver. This creature which has no discernible features, which hunts humans who may have been trying to escape, is incredibly creepy. It gives the end of episode 4 the same sort of atmosphere which the first episode of the Daleks had, but this time with a far more alien creature. But sadly the use of the Sliver is very minimal, and with its mid-serial redesign, a lot of the horror of the creature is lost. I mean, the moment it gets its redesign, which gives it a far more standard alien design, it falls to its death. Perhaps if it had survived and continued to hunt Ian through the mines, with its original less discernible design, it could have been a more terrifying addition to the serial. Instead it ends up falling a little bit flat, both literally and figuratively. And to end this plotline before everything starts to come together, the mining bucket lowers into the mine where Ian and Larry meet a Robo-Man, who turns out to be Larry's brother Phil, who he went to the mine to find. Larry is unable to free his brother from the brainwashing and is shot, but seemingly manages to strangle Phil, leaving them both dead. Yeah, I'm still not quite sure how Phil was killed. I always thought he'd got shot by his own gun somehow, but apparently that's not the case. But Larry's sacrifice allows Ian to escape. Now this is where the storylines begin to converge. Starting with Barbara and Jenny, having been captured, they're thrown into the mines, where they meet Wells. Still carrying the plans for the bombs, Barbara decides to use them to get to Dalek Command, by pretending to reveal information about an attack that is to take place using the bombs which fools the Dalek on guard, and so Barbara and Jenny are taken to Dalek Command. And this is one of the moments where Barbara really shines, as it shows off both her bravery and her knowledge of history. She somewhat casually walks around Dalek Command while telling the Supreme about this fake attack, and references historical battles such as the Indian Mutiny and the Boston Tea Party, both conflicts which involved the British East India Company. I feel like this was intentional, as Nation was originally meant to write a historical based on the Indian Mutiny, but this was replaced by a combination of factors, which led to this serial. Clearly this was Nation adding in information he had learned from his research, as Barbara just dumped some historical facts on the Supreme Dalek.
Right.
Although I think Nation seems to mix things up a bit, as it was the Boston Tea Party which involved people disguised as Red Indians, or for a far more modern term, Native Americans. Although at the same time Barbara seems to be directly referencing the events of the mutiny as an example, so it could be that Nation was correct and I'm just confusing myself. Either way, this is a good scene where Barbara is able to shine and use her knowledge to her advantage, although this plan fails, leading to Barbara and Jenny being chained to a wall with some sort of neck restraint. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Susan's group have only just arrived at the mine, which I want to notice towards the start of episode 6. Fortunately, the Doctor immediately gets to action and begins forming a plan. He sends Susan and David to destroy the outer cable ring of something which the Doctor thinks will immobilise the Daleks. I have to admit that this is not well explained. Meanwhile, he and Tyler make their way to Dalek Command, where they release Barbara and Jenny. I do want to notice it's kind of funny that when the Daleks are leaving, one looks straight at him as it's passing, and once in Dalek Command we get one of the best shots of the serial, as the Dalek enters and we see the Doctor standing fearlessly and defiantly as it approaches him. But once again, Barbara steals the show when she attempts to turn the Robo-Men on the Daleks again. I am starting to think that Barbara is becoming my favourite character of the quartet. She seems so annoyed as the Doctor takes over just to speed things up. Barbara's, and by extension Jacqueline Hill's dedication to this, is just so good. Now, before I move on to Ian, I need to talk about the Daleks' actual plan, the entire reason for their invasion. So the Daleks spend years slowly weakening humanity from disease and bombardment until they were too weak to fight off the Daleks when they invaded. This is the reason for the No Dumping Bodies poster in episode 1. So the Daleks invaded Earth and subjugated humanity, or at least England. There are references to other places the Daleks have taken over, notably India, but their operations are only happening in England, which will make their final defeat even more confusing. But anyway, the Daleks are mining, not for a mineral or any resources. They're instead planning to mine down to a fissure where they will drop a bomb which will split the Earth's crust open, allowing them to extract the core and replace it with a power system so that they can pilot the Earth anywhere in the universe. So I'm not going to say this is stupid, but it is. I really can't say anything about this plan which hasn't been said before, and admittedly after so much build-up, this reveal is quite a letdown, as it's so silly and just makes you scratch your head. And this is where we get to another Whittaker rewrite, as Nation's original script for how this would play out was even more silly than what actually happens. Nation's original script had the Daleks mining a massive crevice across England, and an explosive was to be dropped by cable car into the centre of the crevasse. in order to split the Earth open. This is why I've been referring to an abyss, due to the fact that this idea is somewhat preserved in the broadcast version, but Whittaker changed the plot as to make it less silly, somewhat at least. Notably, he removes the abyss and replaces it with a single shaft, which is being drilled, and so the bomb can be dropped down the shaft instead. This change was also made as the original ending featured Ian hiding in the cable car, and so his added weight caused the cable to begin to break. The Daleks bring the explosive back, Ian escapes, and the Daleks send the bomb back out, ignoring the fact that the cable is breaking, which causes it to fall early, and instead of cracking the Earth open, it blows up all the Daleks. So Whittaker didn't like this ending due to the massive look factor and changed it to the ending we got. I also want to say that given the strength of the cable, it's highly unlikely that Ian's added weight would have caused it to break to the extent needed, which makes me wonder how heavy Nation thought Ian was. And with that out of the way, it's time to discuss Ian's plot. So after escaping the mine, he ends up in the Daleks' bomb room and hides within the bomb. So the bomb is dropped, Ian ends up stopping it by messing with the wire so the Daleks pull it back up. Ian then escapes down the side of the abyss in a very serious scene. From there he blocks the bomb's route so it becomes trapped, meaning it'll explode very near to Dalek Command. I also just want to note that within the story, he does this as the Doctor arrives at Dalek Command, meaning the Dalek's end is already in motion before the Doctor has really done anything. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Ian is the main character at this point in the show. So everyone reunites and escapes before the bomb explodes, which destroys all the Daleks and the entire fleet of saucers seemingly. Although given that the Daleks have apparently conquered the entire planet, you have to wonder why they were all at the mine, especially since they were in the process of leaving the planet. But this video is already going on and on and on, so I need to wrap things up as we've still got a massive thing to talk about. So with the plot wrapped up, the quartet return to London, and with the help of Wells and others they are able to uncover the TARDIS, allowing them to escape. But this is where Susan has a dilemma. Susan's fallen in love with David, who has fallen in love with her, and Susan can't decide. She wants to stay but can't leave the Doctor. Now sadly the show up to this really hasn't done too good of a job of building up the Doctor and Susan's relationship, but this scene from both the script and the acting really makes you forget that.
It would be nice if
I'm sorry, Susan. Dear, I shall have to mend this, shan't I, now?
Oh, don't worry, Grandfather.
Oh, no, worry, my child. No, when I finish with this, it'll look as good as new. Yes, you little monkey. You know, since you've been away from that school, you seem to have got yourself thoroughly disorganized.
The two of them just can't say what they are thinking to one another. It's hurting them so much. Susan wants to stay and wants the entire quartet to stay so she can. But the Doctor is a traveller and he wants Susan to have a proper life which she can't have with him. And he knows that she will never leave him. The Doctor knows he has to be the one to do something and knows that that has to be for him to leave her rather than the other way around. And their final face-to-face discussion is just heartbreaking.
Yes, you need taking in hand. I think I must check up on the ship, if you don't mind.
You can see the exact moment the Doctor realises what he has to do. The Doctor returns to the TARDIS while Susan says her goodbye and he locks the door so she can't get in. Now I wish I could just put the entire clip here as I really don't think there's anything I could say to add to it. Hartnell's performance as he gives the Doctor's speech to Susan is just so saddening. You can see the pain in his eyes, knowing he may never be able to return, but still vowing that one day he will.
One day I shall come back. Yes, I shall come back.
Susan watches the TARDIS dematerialise, walking to where it once stood, not knowing what to do, and so takes David's hand and drops her keys to the ground before walking away. And like with the Dalek reveal, this final scene was written by David Whittaker. Having already proven to be great with character, he doesn't fail to pull on the heartstrings here. Due to production problems, Hartnell did omit 2 lines from the speech. But you know what? The speech as Hartnell said it is absolutely perfect. And I can't imagine any other ending for it than the one we got. The first departure of the lead character. And although we could have had more from the character going into this serial, the exit is perfect within how we understand the characters, and makes you forget what was lacking from before it. Also, the Doctor takes Susan's shoe into the TARDIS saying he'll repair it, meaning he left her with 1 shoe. I mean, he's not perfect. So the Dalek Invasion of Earth is a very mixed bag. The first part is incredible with its tension. There are plenty of great moments for the characters, and the final scene is just heartbreaking. But at the same time, the plot builds up to a very silly conclusion. The pacing is improved from the previous Dalek serial, which definitely makes it a less boring watch. Do I prefer it to the Daleks, though? It's hard to say. Although with many more Dalek serials to come, will it still be memorable and be able to stand against them? We'll find out. So that ends Doctor Who's first production block, but the second season is well underway. With the quartet now a trio, things are changing. Whittaker has also stepped down from the job of story editor, but the next serial is all his own. Next time, The Rescue.